Have you ever reached a moment in life when you realized you had been living for everyone else, except yourself? Tonight's story is about a man who finally made a decision that changed everything. A quiet decision. One he never planned to share with the world. But once he started living for himself, he stepped into a hidden world filled with temptation, secrets, and unforgettable encounters. What began as a simple desire for freedom slowly turned into a series of adventures he never expected. Moments that existed far away from judgment, expectations, and the life he once knew. This story is for mature listeners, and it explores the complicated choices people sometimes make when they feel invisible in their own lives. So sit back, relax, and step into a story about freedom, secrecy, and the risks people take when they finally decide to follow their desires. And if you enjoy deep, emotional, and thought-provoking stories like this, make sure you subscribe to the channel and stay with us until the end, because this journey is only just beginning. For most of my life, I lived according to other people's expectations. I did what a man was supposed to do. I worked hard. I stayed loyal to routines. I kept my opinions quiet when it was easier that way. I told myself that responsibility mattered more than happiness. That discipline mattered more than desire. But somewhere along the line, something inside me started to feel empty. It didn't happen suddenly. It crept in slowly, like a shadow stretching across the floor at sunset. Each year felt the same as the last. Work. Bills. Obligations. Conversations that sounded rehearsed. I realized one night while sitting alone in my apartment that I could barely remember the last time I had done something purely because I wanted to. Not because it was practical. Not because it was expected. But because it made me feel alive. That realization scared me. And yet, it also lit a small spark. So I made a decision that felt reckless and liberating at the same time. I would start living for myself. I wouldn't destroy anyone's life. I wouldn't deliberately hurt anyone. But I would stop pretending that my desires didn't exist. At first, the changes were small. I began going out more. Not to loud clubs or wild parties, but to quiet lounges and dimly lit bars where conversations could stretch late into the night. I started traveling on weekends instead of staying home. I rediscovered things I used to enjoy. Music, long drives, meeting strangers who had no expectations of me. That's when I met her. I won't reveal her name. I promised her that much. She was sitting alone at a corner table the first night I noticed her. The kind of woman people looked at twice, not only because she was beautiful, but because she carried herself with quiet confidence. She wore a simple black dress. Nothing flashy. But there was something magnetic about the way she held herself. She looked like someone who had stories she didn't tell easily. I wasn't planning to speak to her. But life, I've learned, tends to change direction in the smallest moments. She glanced up while I was passing her table. Our eyes met for just a second. And she smiled. Not the polite smile strangers give each other. It was the kind that suggested recognition. As if she already knew something about me. I sat down across from her without overthinking it. "Do I know you?" I asked. She laughed softly. "No," she said. "But you looked like someone who needed a conversation." That was the beginning. What I didn't know then was that meeting her would take my decision to live for myself into places I had never imagined. Over the next few weeks, we began seeing each other more often. At first it happened by coincidence. Or at least it seemed that way. I would show up at the same lounge, and she would already be there. Or she would arrive shortly after. Sometimes we talked for an hour. Sometimes we stayed until the staff started stacking chairs. She had a way of listening that made you forget the rest of the room existed. But she rarely talked about herself. That mystery intrigued me. One night, after we had known each other for nearly a month, I finally asked. "So," I said, swirling the last of my drink. "You know plenty about me. But I know almost nothing about you. She smiled. That's intentional. Why? She leaned back slightly, studying my face as if deciding something. Then she said quietly, because my life is complicated. I didn't press. But a few minutes later, she spoke again. I'm married. The words hung between us. I expected the conversation to end there. Many men would have politely excused themselves. But she continued before I could react. My husband is a good man, she said. Hardworking. Responsible. Reliable. Something about the way she said those words felt rehearsed. But? I asked gently. She sighed. But somewhere along the way, I disappeared. She explained that her life had become a routine built around other people's expectations. Her husband, their social circle, family obligations. She was admired by everyone. But no one really saw her. I wake up every day and feel like I'm living someone else's life, she said quietly. That was the first real crack in the wall she had built around herself. After that night, the tone between us changed. There was tension in the air whenever we sat together. Not spoken. But undeniable. We began meeting in quieter places. Small restaurants. Parks. Long evening walks through parts of the city where no one paid attention to strangers. We talked about dreams we had buried years ago. About regrets. About choices we would make differently if we could go back. And slowly, the distance between us began to fade. One evening we found ourselves sitting by the river just after sunset. The sky had turned deep shades of purple and orange. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. Do you ever think about what life could have been if you had chosen differently? All the time, I admitted. She nodded. Me too. Then she took my hand. That was the first line we crossed. Not out of recklessness. But because something inside both of us had already changed. Our connection quickly became something deeper than either of us had expected. We didn't rush into anything. In fact, the tension of holding back made every moment more intense. We would sit close together in quiet places, talking for hours about things neither of us had ever admitted to anyone else. She told me about the version of herself she used to be, adventurous, spontaneous, curious about the world. Marriage hadn't destroyed that woman. But it had buried her. And slowly, she was starting to dig herself out again. You make me feel like myself, she told me one night. That confession changed everything. Soon we began planning small escapes together. Not reckless ones. Careful ones. Afternoons in distant parts of the city. Quiet hotels where no one asked questions. Long drives where the road stretched endlessly in front of us. In those moments, she was no longer the careful, composed woman bound by expectations. She laughed more freely. She spoke more honestly. And yes, our connection became physical. But it was never just about desire. It was about freedom. About two people stepping outside the roles the world had written for them. One night, after we had spent hours talking and watching the rain fall outside a hotel window, she said something that stayed with me. I don't regret this. I studied her face carefully. Not even a little? She shook her head slowly. No. Then she added something I didn't expect. And I'm not ashamed either. She explained that for the first time in years, she felt alive. Not trapped. Not invisible. Alive. Of course, we both understood the risks. But she was careful. Very careful. Her husband never suspected anything. And she intended to keep it that way. Some things, she said once, belong only to the people who live them. Over time, our meetings became a secret world of their own. A life that existed parallel to our ordinary routines. We traveled together occasionally, short trips where we could disappear for a day or two without raising suspicion. Those were the moments when she seemed happiest. She would wake early, open the hotel curtains, and stand by the window watching the morning light spill across unfamiliar streets. "I wish life could always feel like this," she said once. "What's stopping you?" I asked. She smiled faintly. Reality. But even within that reality, she refused to go back to the woman she had been before. She had made a decision similar to mine. She would start living for herself. Carefully. Quietly. But unapologetically. Our adventures weren't always dramatic. Sometimes they were simple. Late-night conversations. Walking through quiet neighborhoods. Sharing stories neither of us could tell anyone else. But there were also moments of intense closeness that felt almost surreal. Moments where time seemed to slow down and the rest of the world disappeared. In those moments, she was fearless. Not reckless. But bold in a way she had never allowed herself to be before. And she never expressed regret. That surprised me the most. She didn't see herself as someone doing something shameful. She saw herself as someone reclaiming a piece of her life. "I've spent years being the person everyone else needed me to be," she once told me. "Now I'm allowing myself to be who I want to be." And strangely enough, I understood her. Because my own life had changed since meeting her. I was no longer drifting through routine. I was experiencing life again. Even if it existed in the shadows. It has been a long time since the night we first met. Life has continued moving forward in its unpredictable way. We don't see each other as often now. Circumstances change. Paths shift. Time reshapes everything. But the chapter we shared remains one of the most vivid experiences of my life. And she remains exactly what she always wanted to be. Anonymous. Her husband never discovered anything. Her world never collapsed. From the outside, her life still looks perfectly normal. But I know something most people never will. I know that beneath the surface of that carefully constructed life, she once allowed herself to experience something real. Something wild. Something free. And she never apologized for it. Sometimes I wonder if she still thinks about those nights. The quiet bars. The long drives. The hidden corners of the world where we allowed ourselves to exist without expectations. Maybe she does. Maybe she doesn't. But I know this. Choosing to live for myself changed everything. It led me into a chapter of life filled with risk, passion, and honesty. A chapter that few people ever admit to living. And while our story will remain hidden from the world, the memories are mine to keep. And hers too. Some adventures, after all, are not meant to be confessed. Only remembered. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. Sometimes life isn't as simple as right or wrong. Sometimes people reach a moment where they just want to feel alive again, even if the choices they make exist in the shadows. The man in this story chose to live for himself, and the experiences that followed became memories that would stay with him forever, hidden from the world, but impossible to forget. But now I want to hear from you. Do you think he made the right decision by choosing his own happiness? Or do you believe some lines should never be crossed? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective might start a conversation someone else needs to hear. And if you enjoy powerful, emotional, and mature storytelling like this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. Because here, every story reveals a side of life most people are too afraid to talk about. And trust me, the next one might surprise you even more. Disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and storytelling purposes. The characters, events, and situations are not intended to represent real individuals or real-life experiences. Viewer discretion is advised as the story contains mature themes intended for adult audiences.